The rain over New York City fell in relentless silvery sheets, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of grey and neon. From the back of a blacked-out sedan, the city's symphony was muted to a dull, percussive hum on the roof. Inside, however, a storm of a different kind was brewing, silent and devastating. Gwendolen Astor stared through the tear-streaked window, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy. Across the street, the penthouse of the Ethelgard Tower blazed with light, a beacon of opulence and betrayal. Every flicker of light, every burst of distant laughter was a fresh stab to her heart. This was her husband's 40th birthday party, a party she wasn't invited to, a party for him and for her. Life for Gwendolen Astor had become a paradox, a beautiful prison crafted from marble glass and unspoken rules. Their Fifth Avenue triplex, a marvel of minimalist architecture curated by the world's most sought-after designers, felt less like a home and more like a museum to a life she was supposed to be living. The vast windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park, but most days they only served to show her a world that was vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the sterile silence within her own walls. She had met Jackson Dempsey 5 years ago at a charity gala. He wasn't just wealthy. He was Dempsey Wealth, a name synonymous with global logistics and old-world power. He was charming, intelligent, and possessed a gravitational pull that was impossible to resist. He'd pursued her with a single-minded intensity that felt like a grand romance novel come to life. Gwendolen, then a promising art historian with a modest background, was swept into his orbit. Their wedding was the society event of the year, a fairy tale meticulously stage-managed by Jackson's formidable mother, Madeline Dempsey. For the first 2 years it was idyllic. They traveled, they laughed, and Jackson seemed genuinely enamored. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the gilding on the cage began to tarnish. Jackson's work became all-consuming. The 12-hour workdays bled into 16-hour ones. Business trips, once a source of exciting reunions, became more frequent and lasted longer. The texts became shorter, the phone calls more perfunctory. He was physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away. Gwendolen tried to bridge the chasm. She'd wait up for him, wearing the dresses he liked, having his favorite scotch ready. But he would often walk in, loosen his tie with a sigh, give her a peck on the cheek that felt more like a duty than a desire, and retreat into his study with a mountain of paperwork. "Big merger, Gwen," he'd say the words, a familiar shield. "You understand." And she did. Or she tried to. She told herself this was the price of admission to his world. This was the sacrifice required to be the wife of a titan like Jackson Dempsey. Discovering she was pregnant had been a moment of pure, unadulterated joy for Gwendolen. She had imagined it would be the tether that would pull Jackson back to them. When she told him, he'd smiled a genuine, dazzling smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. He'd held his hand on her still flat stomach and whispered, "An heir, a Dempsey heir." The word heir had pricked at her, a subtle hint that this was more about legacy than love, but she'd pushed the thought away, clinging to the warmth of his embrace. The initial excitement soon faded back into the familiar pattern of absence. In fact, it worsened. He became more guarded with his phone, which was now perpetually silenced, and face down on his nightstand. There was the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to his shirts when they came back from the dry cleaners, a subtle exotic fragrance of sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine. When she'd asked, he'd waved it away. Probably from a client at the firm. You know how it is, handshakes and meetings all day. The lies were clumsy, almost insulting in their simplicity. The final damning piece of evidence came a week before his 40th birthday. Jackson had told her he was arranging a quiet dinner for them at home. "Just the two of us, Gwen. And the little one," he'd said, tapping her belly. "Before things get crazy with the baby." She had been so relieved, so hopeful. The next day, while searching for a misplaced book in his study, she found an invoice tucked into a portfolio. It wasn't for a quiet dinner. It was from Elysian Events, one of the city's most exclusive party planners. The invoice detailed a lavish celebration for 200 guests at the Ethelgard Tower's private penthouse rooftop, a venue known for its hedonistic parties and stringent privacy. The event was for tonight, his birthday. The client was listed as K. Volkova. The name meant nothing to her. A quick, trembling search on the internet changed everything. Katerina Volkova. A striking, raven-haired woman described in society blogs as an art consultant and socialite. There were photos of her at various international events, often in the background of pictures featuring powerful men. And in one photo taken at Art Basel in Miami 6 months ago, a trip Jackson had supposedly taken alone, he was there standing just behind her. His eyes fixed on her with an intensity Gwendolen hadn't seen directed at herself in years. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet dinner was a lie. Her husband was celebrating his milestone birthday with another woman. The betrayal was so profound, so audacious, it left her breathless. She didn't confront him. What would be the point? He would lie, gaslight her, and call her hysterical. The Dempsey way, as she'd learned from his mother, was to handle things with cold, clean precision, not messy emotions. So she played the part of the dutiful, unsuspecting wife. This morning she'd given him his birthday gift, a vintage Patek Philippe watch she'd spent months sourcing. He had kissed her, his lips cool, and thanked her, before rushing off to a critical board meeting that couldn't be moved. Now parked in the rain-slicked street, the expensive watch was probably glinting on his wrist as he held another woman's hand. Her driver, a discreet man named Hector, who had been with her for years, sat silently in the front. His eyes fixed forward, offering her the privacy of his feigned ignorance. "Closer, Hector," Gwendolen whispered, her voice hoarse. "Pull up across the street." The car glided forward. The Ethelgard's entrance was a flurry of activity. Valets with black umbrellas rushed to shield arriving guests from the downpour. Women in glittering gowns and men in sharp tuxedos laughed as they disappeared into the golden light of the lobby. It was a world away from the silent, dark interior of her car. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, she could see silhouettes moving against the bright lights. The sound was a faint, thumping bass that vibrated through the very asphalt. She imagined the scene, the clinking of champagne flutes, the pretentious chatter, the air thick with expensive perfume and false congratulations. And then she saw them. The rooftop terrace doors slid open, and a couple stepped out into a covered alcove away from the main crowd. Even from this distance, she knew it was him. The confident set of his shoulders, the way he gestured with his hands as he spoke. And beside him, Katerina Volkova. She was even more stunning in person, a tall, statuesque figure in a crimson dress that seemed poured onto her frame. Her dark hair was slicked back, her profile sharp and aristocratic. Gwendolen's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She watched as Jackson leaned in, his expression animated and joyful in a way she ached for. He was laughing, a full-throated, genuine laugh that she hadn't heard in their silent home for what felt like an eternity. Katerina reached up and adjusted his tie. It was an intimate, familiar gesture that spoke of 1,000 other moments just like it. Then Jackson's hands went to her waist, pulling her closer. Gwendolen felt the air leave her lungs. He was going to kiss her, here in front of the whole world on his birthday. But he didn't. He did something far worse. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gwendolen recognized it instantly. It was from Cartier. A few weeks ago, she had pointed out a stunning diamond necklace in a magazine, a piece called L'Aurore Boreale, a cascade of white and blue diamonds. She had mentioned how beautiful it was, a wistful passing comment. Jackson had smiled vaguely and said nothing. He opened the box. Even from across the street, the diamonds caught the light, exploding in a spray of fire. It was the necklace. He was giving her necklace to another woman. Katerina's gasp was visible. She threw her arms around his neck. Jackson fastened the clasp, his fingers lingering on her skin. He then tilted her chin up, and this time he did kiss her. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate kiss, a public declaration under the glittering, indifferent New York skyline. A single hot tear escaped Gwendolen's eye, then another, until they were flowing freely, silent and scalding. Each one was a testament to a broken promise, a shattered dream. The man she had married, the father of her unborn child, was celebrating his life with someone else, adorning her with treasures meant for his wife. In the back of the silent, opulent car, surrounded by the trappings of a life she no longer recognized, Gwendolen Astor finally understood. She wasn't just in a gilded cage. The cage was empty, and she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The storm inside her finally broke, and she wept her quiet sobs, lost to the sound of the rain and the distant mocking music. The drive back to the Fifth Avenue triplex was a blur of smeared city lights and suffocating silence. Each raindrop that slid down the window felt like one of her own tears. When Hector pulled up to the private entrance, he finally broke his professional silence. "Mrs. Dempsey." He said, his voice soft, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right? Should I call someone?" His simple act of kindness was almost her undoing. She shook her head, unable to form words, and fled the car, seeking the cold, empty sanctuary of her home. The triplex, usually a symbol of Jackson's success, now felt like a mausoleum. The cavernous rooms filled with priceless art and designer furniture echoed with the hollowness of her marriage. She walked through the space, her hand trailing along the cold marble countertops and the smooth, impersonal surfaces. Every object was a reminder of him, of the life he had built, a life in which she was apparently just another beautiful, expensive acquisition. She ended up in the nursery. It was the one room she'd had complete control over. It was painted a soft, calming shade of dove grey, with a beautiful hand-painted mural of a gentle woodland scene on one wall. The custom-made crib stood in the corner, empty and waiting. A pile of impossibly small baby clothes sat folded on the changing table. This room had been her hope, her anchor. It was the future. Now it felt like a monument to her naivety. She sank into the plush rocking chair, the one she had imagined spending countless nights in humming lullabies to her child. The sight of Jackson kissing Katerina, of him placing that necklace around her throat, played on a torturous loop in her mind. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the public nature of it, the sheer arrogance. He hadn't just cheated. He had replaced her. He was building a new life, a more exciting one, and she and their unborn child were being relegated to a quiet, inconvenient secret. The sobs she had held back in the car erupted with gut-wrenching force. It was a primal sound of pain, of a heart being systematically torn apart. She curled into a ball in the chair, her body shaking, her hands wrapped around her belly, as if to shield her baby from the poison of his father's betrayal. How could she bring a child into this, into a world built on a foundation of lies? Hours passed. The city outside quieted. The rain softened to a drizzle. Gwendolyn's tears eventually ran dry, leaving behind a cold, desolate clarity. The grief was still there, a leaden weight in her chest. But something else was beginning to stir beneath it: anger, a slow-burning, righteous fury. She had been a good wife. She had supported him, tolerated his absences, and put his needs above her own. She was carrying his child, and this was her reward: to be humiliated and discarded while he celebrated with his mistress. No. She would not be the tragic, weeping wife who faded into obscurity. She would not be a footnote in the biography of Jackson Dempsey. She was Gwendolyn Astor before she met him, and she would be Gwendolyn Astor long after he was a painful memory. The thought, small and fragile at first, began to grow. She had her own strength, her own intelligence. She had just forgotten how to use it, blinded by the dazzling light of his world. Her trembling hand reached for her phone. She scrolled past Jackson's name, past his mother's, past all the society contacts that were his, not hers. Her finger hovered over a single name: Beatrice Chen. Beatrice, or Bear, as she insisted, had been Gwendolyn's best friend since their post-grad days at Columbia. While Gwendolyn had pursued art history, Bay had gone to law school, emerging as a razor-sharp, take-no-prisoners litigator at one of the city's top firms. She had been wary of Jackson from the start, her perceptive eyes seeing the steel beneath his charm. "He collects beautiful things, Gwen." Bear had warned her gently before the wedding. "Just make sure you're not one of them." Gwendolyn hadn't listened. Now Bee's words echoed in the silent nursery with prophetic clarity. She pressed the call button. It was well after 2 a.m., but she knew Bee would answer. "Gwen!" Bee's voice was instantly alert, cutting through the fog of sleep. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "The baby's fine." Gwendolyn choked out her voice, a raw whisper. "It's Jackson." And then it all came pouring out: the late nights, the suspicious perfume, the secret party, the Ethelgard tower, the crimson dress, the other woman, and the necklace. She recounted every soul-crushing detail, her voice breaking with each new confession of his betrayal. Bee listened without interruption. There was no "I told you so," no judgment, just a focused silence on the other end of the line. When Gwendolyn finally finished her story, hanging in the air like toxic smoke, Bee's response was not one of sympathy, but of strategy. "Okay," Bee said, her voice devoid of emotion, replaced by the calm, lethal precision of a lawyer preparing for battle. "First things first. Do not confront him. Do not text him. Do not call him. When he comes home, you are asleep. If he wakes you, you have a headache. You are polite, you are distant, but you are not accusatory. Do you understand? We give him nothing." "But Bee..." "No buts. Gwen, you are no longer his wife. You are now an opposing party in a negotiation. From this moment on, every word, every action is calculated. Did you take any pictures tonight?" "Pictures? No, I was just sitting there." "Okay, doesn't matter. We can get street camera footage, security logs. Did he use a credit card you have access to for the party planner, or the necklace?" "The invoice I found was for Kay Volkova. He's probably funding her through a shell account. He's not stupid." Gwendolyn said, a bitter taste in her mouth. "No," Bea agreed. "He's not stupid. He's arrogant, and arrogance leaves a trail. Now I want you to do 2 things. First, try to get some sleep. You need to be clear-headed. Second, meet me tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., my office. Not our usual brunch spot. This is business now." "What are we going to do?" Gwendolyn asked the question, sounding small and helpless. Bee's voice dropped, taking on an edge of hard steel that sent a shiver down Gwendolyn's spine. "What are we going to do?" "We are going to protect you and that baby, We are going to methodically and quietly gather every single piece of leverage we can find. We are not just going to divorce him, Gwen. We are going to dismantle him." Hanging up the phone, Gwendolen felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: power. It was a terrifying, unfamiliar sensation. The path forward would be ugly and painful, but for the first time, it was a path of her own choosing. She stood up and walked over to the nursery window, looking out at the waking city. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale grey light over the park. It was a new day. Jackson would come home soon, smelling of champagne, and another woman expecting to find his docile pregnant wife sleeping peacefully. He would find her, but she would not be the same woman he had left yesterday. The shattering was over. Now it was time to pick up the pieces, not to rebuild what she had, but to forge them into a weapon. Beatrice Chen's office was on the 54th floor of a skyscraper in the financial district, a world of polished chrome, smoked glass, and hushed, intimidating efficiency. It was a place where fortunes were made, and empires were brought to their knees through carefully worded clauses and brutal litigation. It was the perfect war room. When Gwendolen arrived, Bea was waiting with 2 cups of black coffee and a plate of pastries that neither of them would touch. Bea looked impeccable, in a sharp navy blue power suit, her demeanor radiating a competence that was immensely calming. "First," Bea said, sliding a folder across the vast mahogany desk, "we need to understand what we're up against." She tapped the folder. "The Dempsey Holdings prenuptial agreement. I went over the copy you sent me last night. It's ironclad as expected. It protects all his premarital assets' inheritance and any growth from those assets. It's designed to give you a comfortable but controlled exit, a one-time settlement and alimony for a few years. It's generous by normal standards, but for a man of his wealth, it's pocket change. It's an insult." "I signed it," Gwendolen said quietly. "I didn't want him to think I was after his money." "Of course you did," Bea said, her tone softening for a moment. "You were in love. They count on that. But there's a morality clause, Article 11, Section B. It voids certain restrictive terms of the settlement in the event of proven marital misconduct leading to public scandal or emotional distress. It's our crowbar. We just need a wall to jam it into." Bea leaned forward, her expression intense. "He thinks you're a piece of art he acquired. Beautiful, quiet, and valuable, but ultimately an object. We need to change his perception. To do that, we need information, not just about the affair, but about everything." She slid a business card across the desk. It was plain white with a single name and number. "Frank Miller, private investigator. He's old-school, discreet, and relentless. He looks like he walked out of a 1940s detective novel, but he can find a hidden bank account faster than a truffle pig. He's the best. And he's expensive." "I don't care," Gwendolen said, her voice firm. "Whatever it costs." The meeting with Frank Miller took place in a dusty, cluttered office in a less glamorous part of town. The man himself was exactly as Bea had described, late 50s, with a crumpled trench coat, a weary face, and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Gwendolen's story, patiently taking notes in a small, spiral-bound notebook. He asked few questions, but they were sharp and to the point. "The girlfriend's name is Katarina Volkova." He asked, his voice a low grumble. "Yes, she's listed as an art consultant." "Right, that's a popular euphemism," Frank said dryly. "And the party was at the Ethelgard. Good. Their security is tight, but their staff is underpaid. I'll start there. I'll also start a full financial workup on Mr. Dempsey. We're looking for accounts, shell corporations, credit cards, anything that isn't on the official books you'd see. And I'll do a deep dive on Ms. Volkova. You'd be surprised what people leave behind on the internet, even when they try to scrub it. For the next 3 weeks, Gwendolyn lived a strange double life. To Jackson, she was quiet and withdrawn, which she explained away as pregnancy-related fatigue and hormones. He seemed to barely notice, wrapped up in his own world. He was often gone before she woke up and came home, long after she'd gone to bed. The charade was exhausting, but every polite smile, every feigned inquiry about his day was a strategic move, lulling him into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, Frank Miller's reports started coming in. They arrived in plain manila envelopes delivered by courier to B's office. Each one was a small explosion in her carefully constructed reality. The first report confirmed the party. Frank had convinced a catering staff member to provide a sworn affidavit. It detailed the event Jackson Dempsey's 40th birthday, hosted and paid for by Katerina Volkova. Jackson was the guest of honor, and his toast to Katerina was described as incredibly intimate, thanking her for bringing color back into his life. The report included blurry cell phone pictures of them kissing of him, feeding her cake of them dancing. It was sordid and damning. The second report was financial. Frank, with the help of a forensic accountant, had unearthed a labyrinth. Jackson was a master at hiding money. There was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, Argent Stream Holdings, which owned another shell in Delaware, which in turn was used to lease the lavish apartment where Katerina Volkova lived. The same corporation funded a credit card with no spending limit, the one she had used to pay for the party, and Frank confirmed the Cartier necklace. It was a clear, undeniable trail of marital assets being funneled to his mistress. But it was the third report, the one on Katerina Volkova, that changed the game. "This is interesting," Frank had said over a secure phone line. "On the surface, she's clean. Born in St. Petersburg, moved to London for school, then to New York, built a career as a consultant. But her digital footprint is suspiciously sterile. It's too perfect. People have messy pasts, old social media accounts they forget about, embarrassing photos. She has none of that. It's like she was born 10 years ago." Frank had kept digging. He'd gone beyond digital records, pulling international archives, and he found it. Katerina Volkova didn't exist before 2013. Her real name was Anya Petrova. The Petrova family had once been prominent in Russian industrial circles, owning a mid-sized but highly profitable shipping company. Gwendolyn's blood ran cold as she read the next part. In the early 2000s, Dempsey Logistics, under the aggressive leadership of Jackson's father, had orchestrated a hostile takeover of several smaller European competitors. One of them was the Petrovas company. The takeover was brutal and legally dubious. The Petrovas were ruined financially and socially. Anya's father, disgraced and bankrupt, had taken his own life a year later. Anya, then just a teenager, had disappeared with her mother. She changed her name. She reinvented herself. Gwendolyn breathed, staring at the report in B's office. She didn't just reinvent herself. Gwen, B said, her eyes wide with the implications. This isn't a simple affair. This isn't a gold digger looking for a benefactor. This is a long con. This is revenge. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying speed. Katerina's meticulous perfection, her targeting of Jackson, the way she had isolated him. She wasn't after his money in the traditional sense. She was positioning herself inside his life, making herself indispensable, likely gaining his trust, perhaps even access to his business secrets. The affair wasn't the goal, it was the weapon. Suddenly the narrative shifted. Jackson wasn't just an adulterer, he was a fool, a powerful, arrogant man being played by a woman whose life his family had destroyed. A new, dangerous idea began to form in Gwendolyn's mind. She had been gathering ammunition for a divorce settlement. But this was something else, entirely. This was a different kind of leverage. Frank found one more thing, B said, pulling out a final sheet of paper. It was a printout of a wire transfer confirmation. Argent Stream Holdings Jackson's secret slush fund made a transfer 2 days ago, $250,000. To Katerina, Gwendolyn asked. No, B said, her voice grim. It was to a man named Declan Monroe. Gwendolyn gasped. Declan Monroe was not just some random name. He was Jackson's fiercest business rival, the CEO of Monroe Atlantic, a competitor who had been chipping away at Dempsey Logistics' market share for years. They hated each other with a vitriol that was legendary in their industry. The betrayal was now a 3-dimensional chess game. Katerina wasn't just seeking personal revenge. She was actively working with Jackson's arch-nemesis. She was feeding information to Monroe, funded by Jackson's own hidden money. This wasn't just marital misconduct anymore. This was corporate espionage. This could ruin him. Gwendolyn looked down at the pile of folders on the desk. The photos, the bank statements, the history of a ruined family. She had started this journey seeking justice for a broken heart. Now she held the key to the potential destruction of the entire Dempsey empire. The question was no longer how she would leave her husband, but how much of his world she would leave intact. The air in the triplex was thick with an unspoken tension. For a week, Gwendolyn had carried her terrible knowledge like a physical weight, moving through her days with a serene, almost chilling calm. She was no longer the grieving wife. She was a general on the eve of a decisive battle. Jackson, oblivious, interpreted her quietude as acceptance, perhaps even a melancholy resignation to the state of their marriage. He was, as B predicted, too arrogant to imagine any other possibility. The confrontation was scheduled with the same precision as a corporate merger. Gwendolyn chose her moment carefully. It was a Sunday evening. Jackson was home, a rare occurrence. He was in his study, a cavernous room, lined with dark wood and leather-bound books, nursing a glass of scotch and reviewing market reports. Gwendolyn walked in without knocking. She was wearing a simple cream-colored cashmere dress that accentuated her pregnancy, a deliberate choice. She wanted him to see everything he was throwing away. She placed a single unmarked manila folder on the polished surface of his antique desk. He looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Gwen, I'm a bit busy here." "I'm sure you are," she said, her voice even and steady. "But you need to see this." He sighed, the sound of a man tolerating an interruption, and casually flipped open the folder. The first thing he saw was a photograph, a high-resolution image taken with a long lens camera. It was of him and Katerina on the terrace of her apartment, locked in a passionate embrace. It was clearly not from the night of his party. It was from 2 days ago. Jackson's face paled. He slammed the folder shut. "What is this? Are you having me followed? Gwendolyn, this is..." "Beneath me," she finished for him, a cold smile touching her lips. "I agree. But desperation calls for rather undignified measures, wouldn't you say?" He stood up, his posture shifting from relaxed confidence to defensive anger. "This is a private matter. It's complicated." "No, it's not," Gwendolyn said, her voice never rising. She placed a second folder on the desk. "This, for example, is not complicated at all." He opened it. Inside were the incorporating documents for Argent Stream Holdings in the Cayman Islands. Next to them were bank statements showing millions of dollars flowing through the account, and then a copy of the lease for a penthouse apartment at the Olympic Tower. Lessee Argent Stream Holdings. Authorized occupant Katerina Volkova. Jackson stared at the papers, his jaw tight. The blood had drained from his face. "Where did you get this? You're a public figure, Jackson. Your life is a matter of public record if you know where to look. And I hired someone who knows exactly where to look." She let that sink in before placing the third and final folder on the desk. "This one I think will be of particular interest to you." He hesitated, his hand hovering over the folder, as if he knew it contained something far more venomous than the previous two. He finally opened it. The first page was a black and white photo of a family, a man, a woman, and a teenage girl with dark, piercing eyes. Underneath it was a name, the Petrova family. The subsequent pages detailed the hostile takeover of Petrova Shipping by Dempsey Logistics in 2002. It included newspaper clippings about the company's bankruptcy and a short, stark article on the suicide of Andrei Petrova. The final page was a document showing a legal name change, Anya Petrova to Katerina Volkova. Jackson sank back into his chair, his billion-dollar empire and carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He looked at Gwendolyn, and for the first time, she saw not arrogance or anger, but a sliver of genuine fear. Her father, he stammered. "Yes," Gwendolyn said softly. "She doesn't love you, Jackson. She hates you. She hates your family. You weren't a lover to her. You were a project, a means to an end. Every whisper, every touch, every night you spent with her was an act of revenge for what your father did to hers." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Jackson looked like a man who had been stabbed the wound, invisible but mortal. His affair wasn't a passionate indiscretion. It was a symptom of his own monumental foolishness. He had been played expertly and ruthlessly. Before he could respond, the study doors opened. Madeline Dempsey stood there, her presence as cold and imposing as ever. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in its usual immaculate coif. Her sharp eyes took in the scene, her son pale and defeated, her daughter-in-law pregnant and radiating an unnerving strength, the open folders on the desk. "I was just leaving," Madeline said, her voice like chipping ice, though it was clear she had just arrived and likely been listening from the hall. "But it seems there's a family matter to attend to." She walked to the desk, her gaze sweeping over the documents. She showed no surprise, no shock. Her expression was one of grim, calculated assessment, like a CEO reviewing a disastrous quarterly report. She looked at Jackson with undisguised contempt. "I warned you about her. I had her vetted. The background was too polished. You in your infinite wisdom told me it was none of my business." She then turned her gaze to Gwendolyn. It was not a warm look, but there was a flicker of something new in it, respect. The kind of respect one predator affords another. "And you," Madeline said. "You've been busy." "I've been protecting myself," Gwendolyn replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And my child." Madeline picked up the folder on Katerina. "This is a significant problem, a vendetta. It compromises you, Jackson. It compromises the company." "I'll handle it," Jackson mumbled, running a hand through his hair. "I'll cut her off." "It's too late for that," Gwendolyn said, her voice cutting through his pathetic attempt to regain control. She slid one final piece of paper out from her sleeve. It was the wire transfer confirmation. "She's not just getting revenge, Jackson. She's getting paid for it." She pushed the paper towards him. He stared at the names. Argent Stream Holdings, Declan Monroe, $250,000. The implication hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair. This was no longer a personal betrayal. This was treason. He had been sleeping with a corporate spy, funded her with his own money, and she was funneling information to his greatest enemy. He hadn't just been unfaithful to his wife. He had been unfaithful to his legacy, to the Dempsey name itself. Madeline snatched the paper, her eyes narrowing as she read it. The mask of icy composure finally cracked, revealing a flash of pure fury. She looked at her son as if he were a complete and utter stranger, a liability that needed to be managed. "You fool!" She whispered the words carrying more venom than a shout. "You catastrophic fool!" The power in the room had shifted entirely. It no longer belonged to Jackson the billionaire titan, or even Madeline the matriarch. It rested in the hands of the pregnant, silent woman they had both so grievously underestimated. Gwendolen stood there, a quiet vessel of their destruction, holding all the cards. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't cried, she hadn't made a scene. She had simply presented the truth, and the truth was more devastating than any emotional outburst could ever be. The war was over before they even knew they were fighting it. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was a study in controlled chaos. Madeline Dempsey, recovering from her momentary shock, took command with the ruthless efficiency of a field marshal. Her first act was to dismiss her son from his own study with a contemptuous wave of her hand. "Go upstairs, Jackson. Pour yourself a drink. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch your phone. Try for once in your life to do nothing." Jackson, looking hollowed out and years older, obeyed without a word, a deposed king shuffling away from his throne. When he was gone, Madeline turned to Gwendolen. The room, which had felt charged with explosive energy, became intensely quiet. It was just the two of them, the matriarch and the heiress, apparent two women on opposite sides of a chasm of betrayal. "You have been far more resourceful than I gave you credit for," Madeline began, her voice a low, clinical monotone. She gestured to the folders. "You've done your homework, so what is it you want? A bigger settlement. Public humiliation, blood. What I want." Gwendolen said, her voice level, "is a future for my child, a future that is stable and secure and free from the toxicity and lies of this family." "A noble sentiment," Madeleine said with a dismissive air. "But we live in a practical world. This information in the wrong hands. Declan Monroe could use this to trigger a shareholder revolt. The corporate espionage charge alone could lead to a federal investigation. This goes far beyond a messy divorce." She paused, her eyes locking onto Gwendolen's. "You hold a gun to the head of this entire company. So I ask you again, what is your price?" Gwendolen had rehearsed this moment with B for hours. She knew her lines. She knew her demands. But looking at this cold, calculating woman, she felt a sudden, powerful impulse to go off script. The game was more complex than she'd realized. "Before we discuss my price," Gwendolen said, walking slowly towards the vast window overlooking the park, "I think there's something you're missing. You think Katerina Anya Petrova is simply working for Declan Monroe. That this is a straightforward case of corporate espionage for money and revenge." Madeleine raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And you believe there's more?" "I know there is," Gwendolen said, turning back to face her. "Frank Miller, my investigator, he kept digging. He's a very thorough man. He found it odd that Declan Monroe, a man known for his meticulous planning, would use someone as emotionally compromised as Anya. A revenge mission is unpredictable. Monroe doesn't like unpredictable variables." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. So Frank looked into the connection between them, and he found a third party, a broker, someone who connected Anya to Monroe, who helped facilitate the entire arrangement. A flicker of unease crossed Madeleine's face. This was new information. This was a piece she didn't have. "Who?" Gwendolen walked back to the desk. She reached into a clutch which she had placed on a nearby chair and pulled out another much thinner file. She opened it and took out a single sheet of paper. It was a photograph. It showed two people sitting at a small, discreet cafe in Guinevere. One was Declan Monroe. The other was a man Gwendolen didn't recognize at first. He was older, distinguished with a familiar air of quiet authority. Frank had to pull a lot of strings to get this. Gwendolen said, her voice barely a whisper. Taken 3 years ago, long before Jackson even met Katerina. She slid the photo across the desk to Madeline. Madeline picked it up. She stared at it, her face slowly losing all its color. Her manicured hand began to tremble ever so slightly. Gwendolen delivered the final, devastating blow. You know who that is, don't you? It's Lawrence Croft, your head of European acquisitions for 20 years, your husband's most trusted lieutenant, the man who orchestrated the Petrova takeover for your family back in 2002. Madeline looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. It was Croft who found Anya Petrova. Gwendolen continued pressing her advantage. It was Croft who knew her history, her potential as a weapon. And it was Croft, your loyal man, who brokered the deal to deliver her to Declan Monroe. And do you know why? Because 5 years ago, when your husband passed away, Jackson decided Croft was part of the old guard. He forced him into early retirement, humiliated him, threw away 20 years of loyalty without a second thought. The carefully constructed world of Madeline Dempsey shattered. The betrayal was not external. It was internal. The enemy was not just at the gates. He had been inside the castle walls for decades. This wasn't just Jackson's affair. This wasn't just Anya's revenge or Declan's corporate raiding. This was a rot that started within their own organization, a ghost of their own past business practices coming back to haunt them, orchestrated by one of their own. Katerina wasn't the mastermind. Declan Monroe wasn't the sole instigator. They were both pieces in a much larger game of revenge, one initiated by a man the Dempseys themselves had created and then discarded. "My God," Madeline whispered, sinking into the chair Jackson had just vacated. For the first time, Gwendolen saw her not as a powerful matriarch, but as an old woman surveying the ruins of her legacy. The sins of the father, the sins of the son, and the sins of their most loyal servant had all converged into this single catastrophic moment. "So you see, Madeline," Gwendolen said, her voice now filled with an icy finality, "this is far bigger than you imagined. Declan Monroe has an insider's roadmap to your company's weaknesses provided by your own former executive. He has a weapon in your son's bed. And she tapped the folders on the desk, have the proof of all of it." She let the full weight of the situation settle upon the older woman. "We are no longer negotiating the terms of a divorce settlement. We are negotiating the survival of Dempsey Logistics, and I am now your most important business partner." The twist wasn't just that the Mistress was a spy. The twist was that the entire conspiracy was an inside job, a blowback from the Dempseys' own ruthless history. Gwendolen had thought she was holding a gun. She now realized she was holding the detonator to a bomb that had been planted under the Dempsey Empire years ago, and she was the only one who could decide whether or not to push the button. In the days that followed, the Fifth Avenue triplex became a corporate crisis center, disguised as a luxury home. Madeline, stripped of her arrogance and galvanized by the threat to her family's legacy, worked with a terrifying focus. Jackson was a ghost in his own house, sidelined, and broken, his authority completely usurped by his mother and the wife he had betrayed. He was made to understand in no uncertain terms by Madeline that his only role was to remain silent and do exactly as he was told. The negotiations did not take place over a boardroom table, but in the sterile, art-filled living room. It was Gwendolen with B. Chen at her side against Madeline, and a team of the most ruthless lawyers in New York. Let's be clear about the terms. B started her voice, cutting through the tension. Gwendolen is not interested in a hostile takeover or a public scandal. A scandal hurts the company's stock, which in turn hurts the value of her child's future inheritance. We are all, for better or worse, invested in the continued stability of Dempsey Logistics. Madeline nodded, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. This was language she understood. Therefore, B continued, the evidence my client has gathered regarding the affair, the corporate espionage, and Mr. Croft's involvement will be placed in a secure, encrypted digital vault. The access keys will be held in escrow, to be released only under specific conditions. What conditions? Madeline asked, her voice tight. Gwendolen spoke for the first time, her gaze fixed on Madeline. First, Jackson will step down as CEO, effective immediately. He can retain his seat on the board and his shares, but his operational control is over. The board will be told it's for personal health reasons. You, Madeline, will resume the role of interim CEO until a suitable replacement is found. Your son is a liability. He has proven that. Jackson, sitting on a couch across the room, flinched as if struck but said nothing. His mother didn't even look at him. She just gave a curt nod. Done. Second. Gwendolen went on. The prenuptial agreement is void. It will be replaced by a new post-nuptial agreement. I will not be taking a lump sum payout. Instead, a trust will be established for our child. A trust that cannot be altered or accessed by anyone but a neutral third-party trustee until the child is 25. Into that trust, Jackson will place 20% of his personal shares in Dempsey Logistics, not their cash value, the shares themselves. My child's future will be tied directly to the future of this company. One of Madeline's lawyers started to protest, but she silenced him with a glance. 20% was an immense fortune, a significant portion of Jackson's personal holdings. But it was a brilliant move. It ensured Gwendolen's silence by making her child one of the largest individual shareholders. Their interests were now permanently aligned. Agreed. Madeline said the word, tasting like ash. Third. Gwendolen said, her voice softening slightly. I want the house, this apartment. The title will be transferred to my name, free and clear. I will raise my child here. It's the only home he or she will have ever known, and I won't have their life disrupted because of their father's mistakes. This, for some reason, seemed to hit Madeline the hardest. The triplex was the family's crown jewel, but she knew she had no choice. She nodded again. Finally, Gwendolen said, standing up, I want him gone. Jackson will move out. He can see his child, but by appointment, and not in this home for the first year. There will be no divorce filed. We will remain legally married. A public divorce now on the heels of his health-related departure would raise too many questions. We will be separated quietly and permanently. For the sake of the company, we will maintain the illusion of a family. For the sake of my sanity, he will not be a part of my life. The terms were brutal, but surgically precise. She wasn't destroying the family. She was seizing control of it. She was exiling her husband from his own life, taking his home, a significant portion of his wealth, for their child, and effectively ending his career. She was doing it all without a single headline in the gossip columns. As for the external threats, Madeline handled them with the cold precision she was known for. Lawrence Croft was visited by Madeline's lawyers. Presented with the evidence against him, the disgraced executive disappeared. His severance package revoked his reputation intact, but his power utterly neutralized. Katerina Volkova or Anya Petrova received a similar unannounced visit. She was shown the files detailing her real identity and her conspiracy. She was offered a simple choice: disappear forever, with a one-way ticket back to Europe, and a small, untraceable settlement to ensure she never returned or faced charges of fraud and corporate espionage that would land her in a federal prison. She chose the ticket. Her revenge, so meticulously planned, had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, ignominious retreat. Declan Monroe found his source of information suddenly dry up. Without the insider intelligence from Croft and Katerina, his strategic advantage vanished. He would never know how close he came to toppling the Dempsey giant. 2 months later, Gwendolyn gave birth to a healthy baby boy whom she named Spencer. Spencer Astor Dempsey. He had his father's eyes, but Gwendolyn was determined he would have his mother's strength. The final scene of the drama took place not in the tense living room, but in the quiet nursery. Gwendolyn was rocking Spencer, humming a soft lullaby. Jackson stood in the doorway, a stranger in the home he once owned. He had come for one of his scheduled supervised visits. He looked diminished, a man hollowed out by his own failures. "He's beautiful, Gwen," Jackson whispered. "Yes, he is," she replied, not looking at him. I'm sorry." He said the words sounding inadequate, pathetic. "For everything." Gwendolyn finally looked up at him, her expression not of anger or hate, but of a profound and weary pity. "Don't be sorry, Jackson. Just be better. For him." She turned her attention back to her son, the center of her new world. Jackson stood in the doorway for a long moment, an exile looking in at the life he had forfeited. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the long, empty hall. Gwendolyn Astor had walked into this marriage as a naive art historian and had been treated like a decorative object. She now sat as the undisputed queen of her own domain, the guardian of a significant fortune, and the mother of the future of the Dempsey legacy. She had not set out to win a war only to survive a betrayal, but in doing so, she had learned the language of power and had rewritten the rules of the gilded cage, transforming it from a prison into a fortress. Her son would grow up not knowing the sordid details of his parents' story, but he would be raised by a woman who had faced down an empire and emerged not just intact, but in control. So what begins as a story of heartbreaking betrayal transforms into an incredible saga of resilience and empowerment. Gwendolyn's journey from a weeping wife outside a skyscraper to the quiet, unassailable power within it serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the absence of pain, but about what we choose to build from the wreckage. She didn't just get even. She got everything, but on her own terms, securing a future for the one innocent person in the entire affair, her child. Her story shows that sometimes the most devastating blows can reveal a strength we never knew we had. If Gwendolyn's incredible story of transformation and strategic victory moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a story of strength, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.